always had an interest in medicine and knew I wanted to be a doctor, but it wasn't until my experience as a teacher prior to going to medical school that solidified it for me. I saw how the lack of access to quality health care affected all aspects of people's lives, and it led me to want to be a primary care doctor and help patients navigate the healthcare system as well as learn how to be advocates for themselves. I'm fortunate I get to go to work every day and help my patients through their challenges as well as celebrate their successes, which is very rewarding.
I knew I wanted to be a doctor when I was only in 5th grade, and I recognized I wanted to be a cardiologist after my father had an event when I was still in high school. I've been practicing medicine now for about 15 years since finishing fellowship and training. It's been an honor and a privilege doing the work that we do. It's been extremely rewarding helping the sick to get better and the healthy to stay healthy. Seeing the changes over time and creating relationships with my patients and my families is one of the best parts of medicine.
I feel privileged to be a family physician. People actually consider you part of their family. When you have that connection with people where they are able to relate to you, to open their hearts to you, things make more sense and it's easier to treat them. I love what I do. I love this job. And I think that shows. I think people really respond to that.
It gives me great joy and honor to care for patients throughout their lifetime. I recall examining a young woman that I delivered and thinking, do not mess this up. Fast forward 18 years. With mixed emotions, I signed her physical and alongside her parents sent her off to college during a pandemic. It's been a tough year, but it's connections like these are important and foundational to my work.
I initially wanted to pursue a career in medicine when I broke my arm at age 13. Thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon, but then I realized that primary care was more for me. My true calling in medicine came when I realized that a lot of what I do at work deals with chronic disease like hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes, many of which can be prevented if we focus on healthy lifestyles. And that's the focus of my practice, lifestyle medicine.
I was drawn to plastic surgery because of its potential to have a positive impact on patients' lives. I believe that the mind and body should be in harmony, and I want patients to be satisfied with their self-image. I find reconstructive and aesthetic surgery to be extremely...
From wonderful physicians, some of whom are in this very audience, I also wanted to share my thought on why I am here. I am so grateful to be able to care for my patients and their families, while also supporting my colleagues, so many of you, and feeling supported by them through our own complex journeys. There is so much more, and we are so much more aware of the fact that my job as a physician, as a colleague, as a well-being ambassador, allows me to better appreciate life itself. I'm grateful for you. With that in mind, I wanted to introduce a wonderful colleague and a dear friend, Dr. Randy Lovin. Through the work nationally and locally, he has become a trusted ambassador of well-being with Advocate Aurora and a cheerleader for these webinar series as of late. Randy, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for those kind words. They mean so much. I have to say that listening to that stream, it's so emotional. And because it's reminding us of why we entered the field of medicine. And through my years of practice, it's that connection to that why and to that purpose that allowed me to practice as an emergency physician and a physician leader for 28 years of active practice. I would also like to share my purpose. My inner spirit and its why is very clear. I have an altruistic purpose to be there for others. I entered the field of emergency medicine to take the emergency out of the emergency and to be present for others. Sometimes that called for holding a hand or sitting with a family in silence while acknowledging their own individual spirit and letting them know that I was there for them. I was grateful for the patient, their family, their friend, the first responder, and the nursing, all those who allowed me to be connected to my purpose, my calling, to truly care for others. For the last 16 years, since retiring from active clinical practice of 28 years, I continue to be an engaged leader and connected via an unobstructed pathway, more than ever, to my purpose. I continue to advocate and champion for the well-being throughout Advocate Aurora Health. Though we cannot always cure, we can always heal with every moment of connection to our own inner spirit and to others. Thank you.
Randy, that was a really beautiful dedication, and it connects so well to how today's purpose for our webinar is to take what we do and are sometimes so challenged to do every day and connect it to why, as humans, we are here supporting each other. With that in mind, I'm really excited to introduce our wonderful speakers, Dr. John Yoon and Matthew Yule. Dr. John Yoon is a visiting scholar for physician character development and professional formation in the Curran Institute at the Medical College of Wisconsin. He's also Associate Professor of Medicine, serving as an academic hospitalist and clinical ethicist at the University of Chicago. There, he also directs the program of medicine and religion, which has the long-term vision of developing a new field of medical education chaplaincy. Medical education chaplains embedded within the medical education environment, specifically to provide spiritual care and cultivate the whole person flourishing of physician in training. Towards that end, he serves as a certified spiritual director to practicing clinicians, medical students, and resident trainees in healthcare. And to that point, how fitting is it that Matthew Yule is currently a third-year medical student at the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine, interested in specializing in internal medicine. He graduated with honors from Princeton University with Bachelor of Arts in Molecular Biology and a certificate in Global Health and Health Policy. His current academic interests include exploring the interaction of religion and medicine. With no further ado, we're so honored and proud to welcome you to our conversation about well-being.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction there. Very gracious. It's been almost 2 years since I had the chance to be here with you all. I'm reminded that the last time I came and had a discussion with you all on this topic was pre-pandemic, and the world was a different place back then. So today I'm very excited to be able to share this discussion with you all. Let me see if I can get my slides, and is that working now? Okay. Well, I love the title of today's discussion, Connecting and Reconnecting to Your Why, Reigniting and Keeping the Flame Alive. So hope we'll be able to share some of that together. The last time I was here, I ended with this sort of slide, suggesting that perhaps healthcare might be moving towards the triple aim to quadruple aim, with the fourth aim being the clinician wellness or improved clinician experience. At that time, I was a bit skeptical whether healthcare would move in that direction. And then the pandemic hit, and now it seems like that's what every healthcare system is talking about, the well-being of our clinicians. So we are definitely in an interesting time. I shared in the past about how there's various social forces in healthcare that have produced wonderful movements in quality and improving health outcomes and making society aware of the costs of care. And my interest up to now has been to see how we can continue to support the movements that support clinicians' character and caring and their sense of flourishing. But there have been challenges to flourishing in medicine, and I'll share a little bit about what I mean by flourishing in a bit. But many of these revolve around the very social forces that have produced wonderful movements in medicine. I would say that up to now, pre-pandemic, and perhaps continuing in the midst of this pandemic, a lot of these social forces continue to play a very overwhelming role in affecting clinicians' sense of well-being, to the point where perhaps we're starting to ask these questions. Where did my heart go? Where's my sense of meaning and purpose in this profession? How do I think about what it means to flourish now in a post-COVID-19 world? Pre-pandemic, we were talking about how lot of healthcare was impersonal interactions where we managed health through rules and numbers and money. And then now with COVID-19 introducing a huge shock to the system, potentially heightening some of these trends. To the point where we've, we're asking ourselves, to what extent are we feel like we're, a cog in a bureaucratic machine of healthcare, or potentially more of a pawn, a money-making pawn for an institution, versus someone who's in hospitality offering their services to the care of others. So in this session, I wanted to just briefly share a little bit about this idea of intrinsic motivation and meaning, the why in medicine. In this study of internal medicine residents, they uncovered this understanding of that there's more to burnout than just the circumstances and work-life balance. And in this study, they started discovering that there were themes that residents, even as early as interns, were wondering about these questions about how can I form connections with patients and colleagues? How can I find meaning in medicine? And so, stirred by this idea that this aspect of burnout hadn't been studied, we had pursued a program of research to study that, which Matthew Du will share in a bit. And again, up to now, I felt most of the literature, when it came to wellness, we were, so to speak, touching the surface, the what's and the hows of our practice. And I think we are now in a stage where the whole world and healthcare, we're all asking ourselves now these deeper questions beneath the surface, the whys of healthcare. And it's potentially the COVID-19 atmosphere pandemic has exposed these deeper questions all the more. And so I have conceptualized this as, in some ways, moving to the necessary aspect of well-being to the deeper construct of human flourishing. And what I worry about is if we stay on the surface, that deeper and throughout the course of a clinician's life, that without addressing some of these foundational beliefs and commitments and their tradition-specific understandings of human flourishing, that any wellness initiative that's well-meaning might kind of miss the mark. And I would hate to see that happen. So this is part of the purpose of what we would love to discuss on what it means to flourish as human beings in the practice of medicine. One definition of human flourishing, which I found pretty helpful, because there's actually a lot of different philosophical and psychological definitions, but this definition is pretty simple, and I like it. It says a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. This is by Dr. Tyler Vanderweel, and the director of the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University. And what are the different aspects of a human life that we would aim for its good? And I've mentioned some of these based on some of my colleagues who have explicated this in deeper fashion: the bodily dimension, the social dimension, the local dimension, the reflexive dimension, and the orientational dimension. And without getting into too further, I just wanted to focus on the orientational dimension, the dimension of human flourishing that addresses meaning and purpose, the orientation to the sacred, and our sense of integrity of life. I noticed that in the medical literature, we didn't really touch much of this aspect of human flourishing in the essential wellness literature, with our focus on burnout and mental well-being, as important as that aspect is. So we underwent a program of research, as I mentioned, to begin studying intrinsic motivations. And I won't read some of these, but just to get the sense that we were finding that using measures like a sense of calling, or physicians with long-term relationships, or physicians who reported having high hours that they found personally rewarding, a lot of these measures of intrinsic reward, intrinsic motivation were associated with other measures of well-being. So with that, I just wanted to pass it on to my colleague, Matthew Du, who will share a little bit about one aspect a particular measure of motivation, intrinsic motivation, and this is joy in practice. So I'll pass it on to Matthew now.
Hello all. It's so nice to meet you all. My name is Matthew. Again, I'm a third-year medical student at the University of Chicago, working with Dr. Yoon on this project that I'm pleased to present to you guys. So physician burnout has become a significant problem in medicine, and many have framed the solution to burnout as a movement to rekindle joy in practice. The Joint Commission has defined joy in practice as the aspirational state in which professionals are emotionally and behaviorally compassionately engaged in the care of patients and the mission of their organization. Joy in practice has been previously associated with higher levels of enthusiasm, a sense of significance, and clinical stamina. But while it has been theoretically defined, joy in practice has not been operationalized as a measure of physician well-being in the literature. Most studies have used career satisfaction or burnout as a standalone measure in assessing joy in practice and physician well-being. However, the definition of joy in practice, as we saw in the previous slide, is multifaceted and it can't be simply captured by a single dimension. For example, a physician who is satisfied or shows low levels of burnout may not demonstrate other facets of joy, such as a deeper sense of fulfillment in their work. Therefore, we sought to develop a novel joy in practice measure and compare it with other common measures of physician well-being using a nationally representative survey of U.S. physicians from various specialties and practice settings. And we also sought to identify if these intrinsic motivators, which Dr. Yoon had alluded to, and also extrinsic motivators in physicians are associated with a higher likelihood of experiencing joy in practice. So our survey data came from a nationally representative cohort of 1,123 physicians with a response rate of 64%. And our primary outcome was joy in practice, a composite scale consisting of enthusiasm, fulfillment, and clinical stamina in an after-hours setting. And our secondary outcomes were career and life satisfaction and life meaning, which are commonly used measures of physician well-being currently in the literature. Explanatory variables included a sense of calling, the number of rewarding hours per day, income, and the number of practice years in the profession. So for our joy in practice measure, we assessed enthusiasm by the question of how eager physicians look forward to seeing patients or avoid seeing patients. We also assessed fulfillment through asking how much good physicians feel they have done at the end of the day, and clinical stamina by asking how much they enjoy talking to patients after hours or feel frustrated talking to them. Respondents who showed high levels of all of these three components were categorized as experiencing joy in practice. As for calling, we assess this intrinsic motivator by asking how strongly physicians agree or disagree that medicine is a calling for them. And we also ask them how many hours a day they find personally rewarding as our second intrinsic motivator. So for our results, table 1 here shows that among our cohort, 43% experienced enthusiasm, 73% experienced fulfillment, and 21% experienced clinical stamina from our total cohort. In total, 16% experienced joy in practice. Table 2 here shows that joy in practice measures showed strong associations with validated measures of physician well-being currently in the literature, like career satisfaction, life satisfaction, and life meaning. Here in figure 1, when comparing our joy in practice measure with these other measures of physician well-being, only 17% of physicians who showed high levels of career satisfaction also experienced joy in practice. Likewise, only 21% of physicians who showed low levels of burnout also experienced joy in practice. Table 3 shows that extrinsic motivators, such as the number of practice years and annual income, were not significantly associated with experiencing joy in practice. On the other hand, intrinsic motivators were. Physicians who find a strong sense of calling in medicine had 10 times higher odds of experiencing joy in practice, while physicians with more than 7.5 personally rewarding hours per day had an almost 4 times higher odds. Just to mention a couple of limitations from our study, our measure is provisional our joint practice measure is provisional and require further psychometric testing before it can be utilized as a rigorous indicator. For example, there's other facets of our scale that we could have included, such as gratitude or resilience. And second, the survey data is from 2011, which limits the applicability of our findings to the present landscape of the healthcare system today. So just to discuss some conclusions, first, our joint practice measure demonstrated significant associations with existing validated measures of physician well-being. Second, however, joint practice may not be fully convergent in nature with these other measures, since we found that a majority of physicians who reported high career satisfaction or showed low amounts of burnout did not experience joy in practice. And lastly, intrinsic motivators, namely a strong sense of calling and higher number of boarding hours per day, were significantly associated with a higher likelihood of experiencing joy in practice, while extrinsic motivators such as income were not. So in conclusion, the joy in practice measure that we have created shows preliminary promise as a positive marker of physician well-being. It encompasses many important facets of physician wellness that career satisfaction and burnout do not, such as enthusiasm and a deeper sense of fulfillment. Joy, in its definition, captures a more profound and holistic sense of well-being that more closely relates to the physician's calling of caring for the sick. It is cultivated primarily by one's own mission and values rather than extrinsic factors such as income. And secondly, further analyses after this study should study the contribution of intrinsic motivators to physician well-being. Although the studies on intrinsic motivators currently are few, the evidence that we have is promising. One study found that a strong sense of calling is associated with career satisfaction and life satisfaction. So our study further contributes to the calling literature, now showing that a strong sense of calling is also associated with joy in practice. Furthermore, it's interesting that we found that the number of rewarding hours per day was positively associated with a higher likelihood of experiencing joy in practice. Many studies have found that excessive work hours negatively contribute to career and life satisfaction. But based on our results, it's likely that if these extra work hours are rewarding and meaningful, then maybe they are to increase rather than decrease physician well-being. And lastly, interventions that encourage physicians to develop a sense of calling and meaning within their practice of medicine should be further explored and encouraged. For example, opportunities for individual and group reflection throughout the workday can help foster and remind physicians of the purpose and meaning they have in the practice of medicine. Thank you again for your time, and I'd like to thank my co-authors, Dr. Yoon and Dr. Hyo-Jung Tak, for their help with this study.
Wonderful. Well, if there's a joy in practice, there's a joy in research and joy in collaboration and working with medical students like Matthew. So thank you, Matt. In these final moments here, given that it does seem that this idea of intrinsic motivation is getting at something deep for clinicians, what can we do as fellow colleagues in the healthcare system to help encourage conversations and provide hospitality to these aspects of our human flourishing? And many chaplains on the call here know the FACHE, inquiring about the spiritual backgrounds of patients. I was going to recommend a FACHE for human flourishing, and that one is giving voice and opening up space for colleagues to share what are our foundational beliefs and commitments and values that shape our understanding of what it means to flourish as a human being. What are some of the integrity challenges that I particularly face, or we particularly face, given some of the traditions we may come from? What are the community resources for flourishing that we draw from, or we can help one another to turn to? And how can we help act and address many of these together in our shared training and experiences, our shared career experiences, and our vocational calling to work in healthcare? So this is just something that I put forth as maybe a way to put into small groups or conversations over lunches to share and create spaces for these kind of conversations about intrinsic motivation and human flourishing. So I think I would just skip the last couple minutes here and just share a story of one formative encounter of one physician's way of connecting to their why. And this is a true story when I was a medical student around actually Matthew's level of training. So I'll read this here. One day, I decided to spend the summer shadowing a general internist who also happened to be a clinical ethicist and palliative care specialist. This internist was a well-respected member of his Jewish synagogue and a well-respected clinician in the community. However, during this summer internship, I couldn't tell if I was shadowing a Jewish physician or a Jewish rabbi, because this internist would be offering scriptural texts from the Torah and words of wisdom from the Talmud to give spiritual encouragement to some of his Jewish patients while also checking their blood pressure and counseling them on the risks and benefits of initiating a certain antihypertensive. Though feeling like a rare oddity to me in healthcare, this internist became one of my favorite mentors. He seemed to love his profession. He exuded a joy in his practice that was quite winsome. I probably became an internist because of him. One particular moment, I remember sitting in an encounter with one of his patients. The patient was a middle-aged, well-accomplished professional, but on that day, he looked distraught, distressed, and pitiful. When I walked in with my mentor, the patient glanced over to me with a look on his eyes that seemed to say, "Oh, geez, does that medical student have to be here?" I nervously glanced over at my mentor, motioning that I was getting ready to leave, but my mentor firmly told me to sit down and get ready to take the patient's blood pressure, and so I obliged. As soon as we got to the chief complaint, an outpouring of emotions from the patient interrupted the interview and took me by surprise, and soon I began to realize that, yeah, the patient's blood pressure was a little high, but that was not why he was here. The patient was not particularly religious, but he was here to see his chosen rabbi doctor. For as the interview progressed, I learned that this patient was not only going through a stressful divorce, but the patient's mother was critically ill in the hospital, and his children were all upset at him, not to mention his blood pressure was 150/90. Then before I could awkwardly figure out how to deflate the blood pressure cuff, the patient broke down and wept bitterly. I felt awkward being there. Should I step out and leave? Eventually, my mentor moved gently toward his patient, put a reassuring hand on his shoulder, and sat there in total silence for what seemed like to me an eternity. Then after the time of silence, my mentor just said, "Hey, listen, you're going through a lot right now. We can talk about your blood pressure later. Let's set a time to talk more about what you're going through, okay?" Comforted, the patient nodded, and thus ended the day's patient encounter. And then something happened within me after that moment as I watched my mentor provide comfort to this patient. An emotion swelled in my heart and soul. Shall I say that this was an emotion of joy? I mean, it was amazing. The encounter was quite stressful, actually. I wasn't feeling all that particularly happy about my circumstances that day. But in spite of it all, there was a sacred moment here that I witnessed between a clinician and his patient, which left me with a lingering and abiding sense of purpose and meaning. I experienced, in a small way, my why of medicine. There I call it joy. Why not? Okay. Well, I thought if we had time, I would love to hear an instance of when you've seen clinicians or when you yourself seen your foundational beliefs and commitments playing a role in promoting your own sense of flourishing. But I would just end it here and look forward to our discussion with the panelists and with the audience.
Thank you for your story, Dr. Yoon. Let's look at that a little bit further. And I'd like to introduce the panelists that will join the presenter, our very own Reverend Kathie Bender-Schwich, who is the Vice President of Chaplaincy, but she represents the well-being of our entity, our system, our staff. Dr. Kim Miiller, she is from the Trauma Recovery Center, and she is spearheading the Together as One, the peer-to-peer support. And Dr. Nicole Yule, she's Vice President of Behavioral Health, Director of Wellbeing Core, and she was the leader for the residency program prior to her recent promotion. Congratulations. And if each one of you would like to maybe just tell a little bit about yourself, and if you have any comments about the presentation, I'd be interested in comparing the term enjoy, satisfaction, happiness with connection to purpose. So let's maybe Reverend Kathie, can you start?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Lovin, and hello, everyone. It's great to be with you. In my role as Chief Spiritual Officer here for Advocate Aurora Health, I have the privilege of overseeing our chaplaincy services, our ethics services, but as pertains to this group, I lead our well-being initiative across the entire system. So it's a real privilege to do so. What brought me to this work was ever since even before I went to seminary, I considered going to medical school, but really the connection between faith and health, between one's faith and healing, and this applies not only to our patients, but also to our physicians and care providers. So I've had the privilege of leading this for the last 12 years across the system, and I'm delighted to be here and be part of the panel today. I am an ordained Lutheran pastor with graduate education in healthcare administration. So great to be here as part of the panel today.
Kathie is being very humble. She's a fearless supporter of all things well-being across all of the different core teams. A lot of our site physician and APC well-being work would not be possible without Kathie's support at the highest level. Randy, I think you're muted.
Okay, yes. Okay, I'm sorry. Dr. Eull.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Nicole Yule. I'm a clinical health psychologist. I'm the VP of Therapy Services for Behavioral Health Services. But as Kathie said, we each have a special role with well-being that's maybe not quite within our job description. And so I chair the Bolstering Individual Wellbeing Committee for our organization, and we are focusing on all initiatives that really affect team members on an individual level and a personal level.
Thank you. And I first met Dr. Yule about 2 years ago, and it's been a very, very nice relationship. Dr. Miiller.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I am the Director of Trauma Recovery and Resilience. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been with Advocate Aurora Health since 2014. The main purposes here today is actually my role as a leader over the Together as One program, which is a peer-to-peer support program. I worked as a psychologist on the floor and then started on the trauma recovery centers down in Illinois. I'm starting in 2018. And at that time, I'll be honest, I was challenged. My team, every day, all we heard was trauma, trauma, trauma. We heard the worst stories of what people were going on a daily basis. And as their leader, it was a challenge to try to sometimes keep myself online of why we were doing what we were doing and kind of fighting through the process and supporting them. And also my time on the floor. I saw a lot of times just the level of frustration and people being shorter and sometimes not hearing what was happening. And I knew that these were really good people and honestly were struggling just based on what was going on. And so at that time, I connected with my partner in crime here, Mila Felder, and we started talking about what can we do? What can we do to try to help to provide support to the individuals, in our healthcare system? And it truly started as a small initiative that was going to be down in the Oak Lawn campus. We pulled Kathie in, who has now become my boss, to say, hey, what can we do? We need to do this, but we need to do it right. And when the pandemic hit, it went from being a small little Christ Hospital, Oak Lawn Children's Hospital initiative to a much larger initiative that we're really trying to help to provide that support, not only to be able to help each other, but also most importantly right now through everything that's going on to be able to heal. And I think I was fascinated by listening to your conversation. I guess I was geeking out a little bit as a psychologist. I'm just thinking about, how important it is for us to really connect to that purpose to push us through those difficult days. So thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, most definitely. We've had submitted many questions, 60 or 70 questions. Because of the time limit, we are going to pick a few questions, and hopefully, since they do sort of pertain to the same topic, we'll try to get through the questions that were submitted. But if you have live questions, Dr. Felder is going to be asking those questions. So let's get started. I'm going to start with you, Reverend Kathie. Could you explain what type of work environment or administrative framework does Advocate Aurora Health have, which encourages us to stay connected to our purpose, especially in these times of the pandemic? In other words, what are the different ways that Advocate Aurora Health is supporting our staff's well-being, and where does well-being of the workforce fall within the system's mission and statement?
Sure. Big question, but to start with the last part of it, Advocate Aurora's purpose statement is we help people live well. And I think too often we look at that just as it refers to our patients or the communities we serve, but we really are focused on that also applying to our physicians, care providers, and all of our team members. So that is something that we're taking very seriously. I do have to say it's probably ramped up since the beginning of the pandemic. Kind of a silver lining, if you will, in this pandemic, saying that, yes, we really need to help those who serve within Advocate Aurora live well as well. And one of you said, bringing your whole person to work, that is something we want to continue to encourage, to foster, to nurture. And so looking at well-being from the perspective of not only the individual needs, things that can help people flourish, but also things systemically that can be changed to reduce frustration, to help efficiency and that kind of thing, to give people more personal time as well. But through the Well-Being Council, as Dr. Eull said, we're focusing on individual needs. We're focused on building social community. Some of the things that resonated with me, Dr. Yoon, you said about having groups that talk about your meaning and purpose and how you connect to that. We've done that both in person and virtually through our chaplains and others, pulling people together to talk about that, finding the meaning again in medicine, what helps me flourish, but really working overall as a system to find those spaces, those times to bring people together to talk about who they are as people in addition to the physician they are caring for patients. What gives you excitement in life, and how can we help to foster that?
Yep, thank you. That's it's so important to really understand where we are in this day and age of the pandemic and the unwellness with the disconnecting from the purpose. So thank you for explaining how our system is trying to help us be connected. Dr. Felder, actually Mila, we'll call you Mila, thank you. Do you have any live questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Randy. I have a few. This one is for Dr. Kim Miiller. I really enjoyed Together as One training. Thank you for bringing that to Advocate. Do you have any advice for people who have gone through training but feel too exhausted to help others?
I think that's a perfect question, and it's one we've been talking about a lot. When we initially started this and the way the program was created in Ohio State University was to really focus on the peer-to-peer, to train each other how to feel more comfortable. A lot of times people feel very comfortable approaching patients or the individuals they're working with, but have more difficulty reaching out to our colleagues and saying, hey, what can you do? Are you doing okay? When we see something's off. Really what we're looking at right now with the Together as One training is helping people to really be more aware of how this collective stress actually starts impacting us and how we can do better jobs of taking care of ourselves. And then also just it's one step at a time. And so right now, even with this program, the ask is really not that people are going out and that we're going to put people on a phone tree or anything like that to be able to do that. It's really one person at a time as we continue to try to focus on healing ourselves. And as we get through this process and get more individuals trained, then there will be a lot more structure into how we can actually start implementing that and making more individuals available, by checking in on a database or phone calls. Right now, we do have the phone line, that people can use, and that is being nicely, thank you, the chaplains. Chaplain Connect is really connect. They're actually monitoring that for now. But in the future, after we get enough people trained, we will be making that available so we can have people decide if and when they're ready to be able to be accessed for peer support. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. This is for Dr. Eull. How can we recognize our unique skills and gifts which we bring to the table? If we're not able to know who we are and what we are able to do, it's sometimes hard to understand when we're being blocked from that. So how would you say that we could recognize who we are and what we bring to the table?
I think that there's a couple ideas that I have off the top of my head. The first is that you can journal and explore and become self-aware, take time to process that either through, meditation, prayer, journaling, to think about what did I do well today? What went well today? That's a great question, is what did I do that was really great today? And maybe start to see if there's themes that emerge that, I'm really good communicator, or I'm a really good organizer, or I'm really good at Excel spreadsheets. It really doesn't matter what it is, but just that you're good at it, and that it makes you excited and you go home at the end of the day and say, I totally did a good job on that. But the other thing I think is that we should be eliciting feedback more often from the people around us, the people that report to us, and also the people we report to, and to say, what do you think my strengths are? Or what are the things that you've noticed that I'm doing well that you'd like to see me doing more of? What are the things that you can depend on me for? And I think that gives other people an opportunity to connect with you, to share positivity if maybe they're feeling overwhelmed and burned out and they forget to give you those kudos sometimes. It gives them that opening and sets a space for that, and maybe makes them feel good as well.
Thank you. And that brings to mind narrative medicine. I found that in journaling or being connected to the narrative, you understand who you are inside, and that allows it to come out. So we'll have more to say about narrative medicine a little bit later in there. Do you have another question, Mila? You are muted. Okay.
There is a question for Dr. Yoon that just came in. Dr. Yoon, how are you able to apply your integrative skills and meaningfulness in your clinical practice? What if physician is not religious?
Very good question, for sure. Yeah. Well, so this is why I like the image of the iceberg, the proverbial iceberg, right? There are things on the surface that we all share, whether we're religious or not, that are foundational to our sense of well-being, right? And so what are some of those mutual things that we can talk about together? And these are the things that are actually often discussed in our wellness committees, right? How can we help improve the workflow of our services? What can we do to improve community in our department, right? Irrespective of sort of the foundational beliefs that we carry, right? That's at the surface level, though, right? In the deeper part of the iceberg is where we begin to start now drawing from different areas that we all come from, right? And so given that we may not share and draw from the same resources, how can we create spaces of hospitality over coffee and say, here, let me share how I'm getting meaning from this particular practice. May not be familiar with you, but I'm just sharing this because it gives me joy. But tell me a little bit about some of your practices. So that might be one way to create some spaces of hospitality for those kind of conversations.
Very, very nice reply. And this brings me back to Reverend Kathie. Since we all are from different affiliations, and this is not about religiosity, can you explain the differences in purpose, and does it only come from organized, quote, religion? Or is there... Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off your question. I would say definitely not. It's about the meaning and purpose. What gives you the fire or the spark to get up in the morning and say, yes, I want to do this? For some, it is, as one of the physicians in the video said, it's a calling. It's not a job, it's a vocation or a calling. For those who are religious, they may feel that that calling comes from a higher power, that they've been called to do this. For others, it's a sense of purpose and what brings meaning to my life. And that certainly changes over time. I think when we first get out of school, whether that's medical school or whatever, we want to change the world with our gifts. As things go on and get harder, and maybe during some days during the pandemic, that changing of the world may mean I really meant something to this patient or family member today because I took an extra minute to listen and to hold their hand. So how we interpret that may be different depending on the circumstance, but it's still that purpose in how I'm being called to make a difference to people.
If I could,
go ahead. Yes.
Jump in here. I think, and those of you who maybe like data and research, there is in positive psychology, they've done a lot of research about what Kathie's talking about, this life of affiliation. And they say that this is the most long-standing form of happiness. If you're looking to maintain happiness, not in the I'm so happy, but in this contentment, it's you want to foster a life of affiliation. So it doesn't matter what you're affiliated with, but that you have that connection to a group or a value that goes beyond meeting your own needs. And so whatever that it could be a sport, it could be politics, which seems less likely these days, but it could be a religion, it could be the environment, it could be I'm a woman in healthcare and I'm affiliated with that as meaning for me. It doesn't matter what that is, but just having that affiliation connection that goes beyond what you need for your own, selfish needs or your own personal needs.
Yes. I have Miiller, do you have another question? Otherwise, do you have another question there?
Of course, I have another question.
I know.
I have a question for Dr. Yule. How do you think Advocate Aurora Health can better expand on wonderful GME well-being program to include all clinicians and team members?
I swear I didn't plant that question. Thank you so much to whoever that came from for thinking that we've done a good job in GME. I really appreciate that. Some of the things we've done in GME are just creating access to primary care for all of our physicians to make sure that they have an easy way to get self-care and primary care medical attention. We've also created quick ways to get mental health attention, whether that be through EAP or through behavioral health. We have an expedited system with behavioral health. So we are now exploring, just in those two examples, we're exploring in a committee that's part of my group, we're exploring how to create quick access for certain groups and certain team members to medical care across the system. And Behavioral Health Services is exploring dually licensing a group of psychologists that will be able to provide expedited exclusive care just for our team members. So those are things in the works. They were very well received and continue to be well received in GME, and I hope to improve those things and continue them through the rest of the system. And then also just creating policies that support people taking the time they need to take care of themselves, structure around what is too much work and what we should be asking people to do and not do. So we've been working on some of those policies as a system, and one of them is a patient behavior policy and what we can expect and not have to tolerate from patients, and when we can end someone's care based on the way they're treating a team member. So those are just a few examples of those things.
I have again a follow-up to the purpose idea. People have different purposes. We're from different generations, the near retirement position, middle career, early career, and trainee. What would you recommend, or how would you recommend bringing those differences together so that they're not conflicting with each other? Maybe Dr. Yoon or Matthew, based on your study, you may want to expand on that, or if you can, or somebody else from the panel can. How do we work together with differences? Our purposes change. I think that's very important to state. Purpose does not need to be static. It changes along your career. What you were connected to early is not necessarily what you're connected to later on. Again, being a advocate or activist in climate or women's issues. So anyway,
Randy, I
thoughts?
actually thought that there may be a really good connection now to jump in and ask Matthew to do. As a medical student, during the COVID pandemic, during all of the changes healthcare is experiencing, I'm wondering, how do you feel your education ties you into your purpose? And what do you want to bring with you as a resident having this experience, wonderfully researching with Dr. Yoon?
Sure. Thanks again for letting me come in and speak. During the pandemic, I was a second-year medical student and mostly in class. So I was doing Zoom for most of my second year, and now I'm a third year. So I am in the hospital seeing patients, and it's been really rewarding to actually be in person and have that opportunity. I believe the pandemic kind of, separated me from a lot of different people and a lot of my classmates and a lot of different opportunities that the med school offers to, have med students come together and share about their purpose and also discuss, what's the meaning of medicine and why we're studying, all these different diseases and the pathophysiology. And I think that finally third year has kind of allowed us now in-person opportunities really apply all the diseases that we've learned. And going into residency, I think that one thing I've learned is that keeping relationships strong with mentors that you find are very are kind of doing the same thing that you would want to do maybe in 10 years or 20 years has been very nourishing to me, and also given me hope that, one day maybe my practice might look something different from what Dr. Yoon does, but I can take what Dr. Yoon has done and how I've seen him interact with patients and, apply those lessons to my own practice in the future.
If I could just add, there's this concept in the literature of job crafting where, to the extent that you have the autonomy to shape your job role so that you can maximize the things in your job that enhance your intrinsic motivation, that sort of gets you from just surviving in a job to thriving and flourishing. And so I'm encouraged to hear Matthew's story of, what gives me joy is to be able to say, look, I spent too many years just surviving. I don't want to see the next generation going through the same sort of journey. I hope that we can give them a leg up so that students like Matthew may actually start earlier in their practice in a state of flourishing rather than just kind of surviving. So that will give me great joy, Matthew, to see you thrive much earlier than when I started to find that.
I want to ask a question because right now we're basically talking about self, and we've touched base on how the supportive environment is being created. But we also know through the recent work, National Academy of Medicine and other people who deal with wellness, is that 80% of unwellness comes from systemic or external factors, 20%, and again, plus minus on the percentages. How can we develop trust that this topic is not just the topic of the day and the commitment? And Reverend Kathie, can you help us?
I can tell you what we're doing to try to do that. And I think through our Wellbeing Council and the fact that we have everyone from top administrative leaders to physician leaders to nursing leaders, it's multidisciplinary across the system, all coming together to acknowledge that, yes, we need to provide, as I said, attention to individual needs and sense of purpose and calling, but also what are we as a system doing to either nurture that or go against it, and then looking at ways to alleviate that. So we have our IT people involved, looking at reducing EHR time, those kinds of things as well. But the system is, Advocate Aurora is committed. This is not going to be this was a COVID initiative and once COVID's over, we're done with it. This is being built into the DNA and the structure of the organization as the program that Dr. Miiller leads. It's not something that's going to go away. This is the new normal, and we really hope that our medical students, our residents, like Matthew, will come through this saying, well, this is the normal. This is, this is expected. I can bring my whole self to work. I can acknowledge my personal needs and that kind of thing and have it accepted and nurtured. So we really are working to change the culture of how we care for one another.
And can I just add something to that, Dr. Lovin? One of the things is we're truly trying to, and I'm going to use this, and actually Kathie put out there, we are really trying to get this and to build this into the fabric of the organization. And to make true change, it's going to take time. And that's what we're really trying to do. We're building that structure and we're moving forward. And, as Kathie mentioned, it is truly, it's here to stay, but we're trying to do it right, which is why some of the things are not moving quite as quickly as sometimes people would like and things like that. But I think it's important to keep that in mind that, it takes time to build that trust. It takes time to build that brave space and understanding that it's okay to communicate to somebody and say, I'm not okay. I mean, many people in healthcare have been told you have to make sure you are okay. You have to be okay. You can't not be okay. Where the truth is every one of us has days where we're not okay. And to be able to find that brave space where we can reach out to one of our colleagues or having one of our colleagues reach out to us and saying, hey, what can I do for you today? Because you need that extra support. And I think as we continue one person at a time to truly make that impact and that change, we're going to really build that more supportive environment where it does feel like we have those people to help us connect back to our purpose.
And it's for not just the providers, it's for the whole medical care team, dietitians, the chaplaincy, the phlebotomists. It's the team. And that's what we're trying to put forth, to try to keep everybody flourishing. In my mind, is that everybody is able to work, have their career at the top of their credential. And it is different, and it's complete opposite of surviving. Sometimes we do need to survive when things unexpected come around, such as the pandemic. So we do need to build the resiliency and have ways of doing it. So like a question is, when is our lounge coming back? Or do we have, are we considering putting into the work schedule mental health or wellness time, half hour here, 15 minutes there? Can anybody comment on that? I know we're over time here. We're going to probably extend it a little bit for those who are able to stay on. So is anybody able to talk about that? Or the other thing was brought up was about trust, especially with the peer-to-peer. If I speak about this, am I going to get into trouble, either with the medical board? That's very, we're very much aware of, if we say something wrong, is it going to burn us later? And I think maybe Dr. Miiller, with the peer-to-peer, you might be able to address some of that.
Sure, I'll address that piece with the trust. I mean, one of the things is we're standing pretty firm in the fact that it is a peer support program. They're not there to determine fit for duty. They're not there to determine any of those pieces. That is all taken care of through, the individuals in your different departments and organizations. So what we're working on and we're trying to get individuals to understand is the importance. We're not documenting, we will be in the future documenting an encounter, but we will not be documenting who that encounter is with and the ins and outs of what that is. It's just ultimately to be looking at ways of providing this additional support. And so, we will continue to work with the different individuals from ambassadors to make sure that confidentiality is there as much as possible. But I do want to be clear, they're not there to make those determinations. There are other groups and other, parts of the organization to do that. Our goal is with the peer-to-peer support is they're truly there for that. to hear you, to be there, to be that ear, sometimes to give you that few minutes that you might need to be able to kind of pick it back up and get back to doing what you need to do. Mila, I don't know if you want to add to that. I mean, you've been in a lot of those conversations with me or not.
Yeah, I think that it's safe to say that there is significant anxiety, especially in physicians who are mandated reporters. And so I think that there is anxiety about being a peer in a situation you cannot necessarily avoid asking the question of suicide or fit for duty. The reality is that you step out of your clinical job when you become a peer-to-peer. And so with that, if you truly feel that you're able to support others, which once again, I'm just going to reinforce what Kim said earlier. Today we're asking people to do the training just for their own individual well-being. Yet, if the person feels at some point they want to apply those skills to support others, the general idea that applies to clinicians and non-clinicians participating in peer-to-peer support is that they're not reporters, they're not clinicians, they're peers. They're the shoulder, they're the ear, they're there to offer resources system has. They are not at all engaged in, clinical applications during that peer-to-peer work. And I think that's how trust is built, to answer your question, Randy. And in follow-up to your other question, I think that the core team that Nicole Yule is running, the core team of bolstering individual well-being, as well as Kathie, may have some ideas of some of those breaks and rooms or spaces where people could have effective exodus for a few minutes or hours from clinical practice. So maybe one of you or both of you could jump in.
I think that's going to vary greatly site to site and culture to culture, unit to unit. What we are hoping to do as an organization is create a culture where those kinds of things are valued and supported and normalized. So that each unit, each floor, each department, each specialty can decide how that works for them. I always, joke with my residents that we talk about stepping away or giving yourself a timeout when you need it, because we give those to children, but we don't give them to adults. So we as adults probably need timeouts more than children do, to step away, walk away, take a breath and breathe. But it's not like as if, if my residents are delivering a baby and the baby's crowning, you can say, I'm just feeling a little emotionally overwhelmed right now. I need to take a break and step away. So we also have to teach strategies for how to do that in a moment of chaos when you're surrounded by different disciplines yelling at you, telling you different things, conflicting treatment plans. We need to continue to cultivate those strategies of how to internally deal with those things, not just externally. Kathie, do you have any thoughts on structural?
I would just add too, as far as the coming together socially, we do have a group looking at building social community around Yammer groups, around different outside interests and those kinds of things. And currently we have those types of groups being led by our chaplains virtually, where you can pop into a virtual group just to connect with peers and share what you're going through, or kind of like stepping into a coffee room that might not be available right now because of COVID, but it's a virtual opportunity. So we will continue those as well. And as we move out of the pandemic, look at making use of more spaces within sites to have things like that happen.
That's outstanding. Outstanding. I know we are over right now, so I just want to make sure that that you are aware of that this was part one, and what we're trying to do today was to understand the why and the purpose, because if you don't understand your why and your purpose, you won't know when you're blocked. So it's very important to understand that, or have an idea where that's coming from. And part two, which will be in November, we don't have the exact date right now, but that will deal more with the changing purpose depending upon your journey. Again, trainee, early, mid, late, and even retired from clinical practice. I've been retired for 16 years from clinical practice. And I'm very proud to be part of what's happening right now. And it will be more of breakout groups. We're going to talk individually and then come back and then see how we can collaborate with the systemic and the self working together. How can we work together so that it's well-being for all? And that should be giving some more practical approaches to hearing, this is how we're going to be changing the environment. We're going to add this. We're going to take away that. This is important. Support. So part 2 will be have a little bit more practical approach of how we are creating a healing work environment, and that's what's so important. Any other questions on your end, or how timing-wise? I want to be obviously.
I would just take a moment to celebrate the work done by all, and say tremendous thanks to our support team.
Thank you, Mila, and thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Yolanda, and thank you, Karen Levins, not related. So be well, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great Yoon and Matthew do.
Bye.
Thank you. And this concludes our webinar. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.